Hello everyone, Books with Thanks back again to continue my Shakespeare recap and review series where I'm going through all the plays I haven't read or seen, and I'm trying to tackle one comedy and one tragedy every month. This month's comedy is Merchant of Venice, and this month's tragedy is Timon of Athens. So let's get into it. So first I'd like to just say some general things about both plays. First and foremost, they're both coincidentally all about lending money and then being unable to pay your debts. I think I did vaguely know enough about each play where I could have made that connection before pairing them up, but I actually didn't even think about that. So when I started Timon, and I realized, oh shoot, this is actually cool how this kind of worked out. And this similarity made me wonder, were both plays written around the same time? Did Shakespeare ever have any money issues? After a little bit of light research, no, it's pretty clear that both of these plays were written quite a few years apart. It seems Merchant was more likely first written and performed in the late 1590s, around when the Henriade plays were coming out, and then Timon may not have been written or performed until 8 to 10 years later. So, no, definitely not a strong argument for Shakespeare wrote both of these when he was going through like such and such a financial crisis or time in his life. There's nothing quite like that. But then to add on to how different the context of each plays are, similar to most of these works, there's strong evidence that Timon was co-written with Thomas Middleton, another playwright from that time. There's also evidence and analysis suggesting that Timon was never properly finished. But yeah, I just wanted to share some of those more kind of broader contextual notes here. Also, I'm referring to Merchant as a comedy, as its original categorization in the first folio did. In fact, I and probably a lot of modern day viewers and readers find a lot of uncomfortable, hateful, anti Semitic language and representations in this play. And it makes it somewhat difficult to sift through and find the comedic elements. Similarly, Timon is categorized as a tragedy in the first folio. Apparently, there's also some conversation about how Timon of Athens is a satire, and it's all a big joke on the richest classes. I'd say it still definitely reads like a tragedy to me, or at least it follows suit with the expectations we might bring into it knowing it's a tragedy. Merchant, however, is actually the messier one, and its genre, I think, really depends on who's reading it, what time period they're from, what culture they're from, and most important of all, which parts of Merchant of Venice they're talking about. So, let's go. The Merchant of Venice is a comedy of two wildly different types of stories kind of being smashed together. And I think I feel this way because I can explain it like I wouldn't be surprised if this play started out as Shakespeare toying with a comedic twist on a fairy tale or fable setup. And that fairy tale and even the more comedic characters commenting on that storyline from within it, that's all still there in the final play, but it seems somewhere along the way Shakespeare didn't get more interested in the dashing lord coming to win the heart of a foreign princess, but rather Shakespeare kept coming back to that man's friend who is bankrolling his buddy's efforts to win the princess. So what might be a comedic side note in another story, something like my rich friend has helped me come here to play your game and win your hand in marriage. What's this? He has no money and is in trouble with the law because he's financing my romantic quest on a loan he can't pay off. Oh well, haha. Of course, in that scenario, some hijinks would have ensued, and we would find a bunch of money at the end of the play, pay off the debts, and everyone would live happily ever after. But it really seems here that Shakespeare was much more interested in the friend who's now spent more money than he has, the titular merchant of Venice, Antonio. Furthermore, Shakespeare is interested in some kind of moral or ethical debate over the merciful forgiving of debt. And so he brings in this villainous and heartless Shylock character. Shylock is a Jewish moneylender who doesn't ask for a return on his loan with interest, but instead he asks for a pound of flesh should the merchant Antonio not be able to pay up. Not only does Shakespeare throw in this moneylender, but he also gives the man Shylock a more fleshed out family, or at least a daughter that is stolen away from him by a kind of what seems to be presented as a good young Christian boy. And of course, then the daughter, she wants nothing to do with her father. She wants nothing to do with Judaism. She wants to convert to Christianity. We can come back to that weird side storyline later. So now, because Antonio can't pay back his debt, all of his 3 supposedly safe and profitable merchant vessels and voyages, they've crashed or gotten lost. So now Antonio has no money, and Shylock is demanding his pound of flesh. And everyone else in the play is kind of reacts in the same way, like, oh no, what a wicked moneylender. He's so cruel and uncompromising. And he's petty and violent just for the sake of it. This is the general attitude, and I'm curious what audiences felt at the time, because even beyond our modern day understanding of how harmful these Jewish stereotypes are, I feel like a lot of readers or audience members nowadays would not be so quick to feel sorry for Antonio. He borrowed too much money investing in a friend's kind of fairy tale romance adventure, and now because of his mistakes, he has to pay up. So even like getting rid of the stereotypes and that kind of side of things, I think a lot of modern day audiences would still feel like it's all on Antonio. He's the one who messed up, and he's the one that's in the wrong. In fact, if religion or cultural identity was never part of the story, I would still feel more sorry for the money lent for Shylock than Antonio. He's losing his daughter. Shylock is losing his daughter in more ways than one, and he's not getting his money back. The poor guy. But the play doesn't frame it like that. The play makes it seem like Antonio is in need of saving by his friend and his friend's new princess wife, so they sail back to Venice to defend Antonio. The wife and her maid are in disguise, and they go through this whole charade to basically pull on and pick at like technicalities about the original loan and agreement, all to rake Shylock over the coals and to make him look merciless and villainous. They even end on their big trump card being that even if he's owed a pound of flesh, it would be illegal in Venice for him to get that pound of flesh, because it's illegal for any man to draw another Christian's blood. So even the final argument is basically saying how this violent Jew will never be allowed to hurt the poor, overly generous Christian. That's kind of the unfortunate, uncomfortable point that the trial concludes on. So there's definitely a bigger conversation there. I'm sure Shakespeare scholars can and have talked about this uncomfortable aspect at long length, but I do want to talk about some of the things that I liked, because there is some really fun stuff in here. First, as anti-Jewish as a lot of the play seems to be, Shakespeare does give the Shylock character a decent amount of stage time and a decent amount of lines to express how abused he feels in the society. And I think the sheer presence that Shakespeare allowed for this character has in turn given performers a lot of room to work with and really make Shylock a more sympathetic character, more and more as modern audiences are hoping to see. Maybe Shylock was originally intended to be performed as a mean old villain, and none of his lines taken seriously, but Shakespeare did write the lines, and what's so great about a play like this, a script really, is how actors can transform a character to fit with contemporary attitudes. And Shylock is such a big part of this play that if a performer is transforming the character, they're not only transforming Shylock, but they're also transforming kind of the whole play and the whole theme of the play and how it's understood by audiences. Other things I liked, the kind of fairy tale or fable story I referred to. This is the rich nobleman or a king in a foreign land. He has suitors coming from far and wide to choose either a gold, silver, or lead chest to see who chooses most wisely. Only the man who chooses correctly will be able to marry his daughter, Portia. And Portia is actually a really big character in the play. I'd actually go so far as to call her the main hero. Her actions affect the happiest possible ending. She basically saves the day by going undercover and disguising herself in court to defend her new husband's friend. But her father, I don't think ever shows up, if I remember right. And all the commentary on this game of choose the right chest, it's all kind of mockingly from her and her maid, and they're quite snarky and funny about the whole thing. And they, and me as a reader, take a lot of pleasure in mocking the suitors who aren't choosing the right chest. Portia also talks about how she really wants one guy who just so happens to be Antonio's friend. She really wants someone like him to show up and choose correctly because they met before a long time ago. But that's someone that she could actually see herself with. So at least she and he aren't total strangers when he does finally show up. And then she and her maid, having disguised themselves in the end, they trick their husbands into giving away their wedding rings. Then they scold their husbands when they get home. The women know perfectly well what happened to the rings and how tricky they've kind of been and how much fun they've been having. But they still get a good laugh about pretending to freak out and doubt how much their husbands really love them because they gave their rings away so easily. So that part's actually really funny and really, really interesting. But ultimately, I think it's a play well worth the read. I'd love to be able to go back in time and watch performances from centuries ago to compare those to how this play is performed today. I do highly recommend this play to primarily kind of two camps of people. I guess number one, anyone who's doing a similar like Shakespeare completionist reading project like I'm doing. And two, anyone who also similar to me, anyone with an interest in kind of the history of anti-Semitism, history of racial hatred, and how these things showed up in art and storytelling. But now let's move on to a much simpler play and a much more cynical one, though I think, at least for my tastes, it was a more enjoyable read. This month's tragedy, Timon of Athens. I like listening to old podcast episodes and interviews, lectures and things about Shakespeare and about his plays. And the Shakespearean actor Simon Russell Beale, he once said in an interview that Timon dies twice, and that the play was unfinished. I hadn't read it, seen it, or really heard much about the play before I heard Beale say that, but those kind of notes that he had about the play, those really intrigued me. And I think more and more I'm drawn to these plays that are more difficult to exactly pin down what Shakespeare was going for, maybe where they went wrong. These plays that seem to be a little bit all over the place. I feel like they open themselves up to more interesting conversations, so I was really eager to get to this one. It's actually one of the most basic premises of any Shakespeare I've ever read, with not much going on outside of the main storyline. You basically have a wealthy Athenian named Timon. He throws a bunch of parties, always lending money to friends and artists and politicians and soldiers and so on, and everybody loves him. They're all his best friends when he's being generous with them and gifting them all of these things. Suddenly, his money runs out, he can't pay back his debts, and none of his friends will help him out. He's basically stuck saying, I've helped you all out in your times of need. Now that I'm in a financial pinch, surely someone will help me out, right? Wrong. They were just leeching off of him with no intent of ever reciprocating his generous spirit. So he throws one more party, serves everyone rocks and lukewarm water. He yells at them and chases them out of his house, but then he flees the city to go live in a cave where he finds gold. Yay, at first, you might think this is a big success. Meanwhile, kind of a smaller side story that winds up being important. You have this soldier captain character named Alcibiades, and one of his soldiers is arrested and put on trial for having killed the man in like a rage or something. So the captain, Alcibiades, he is exiled for trying to defend and like get the charges dropped on his murderous soldier. Alcibiades is one of several friends who, near the end of the play, in a series of visits, happens upon Timon living in his cave. It seems like Timon is still recklessly gifting away all of his wealth, but now it's not to make friends too much as it's on the tone of, here, Alcibiades, take a lot of my gold and use it to strengthen your army and your exiled rebel forces to defeat Athens, because we hate Athens and we hate how horrible that place is and how hypocritical everyone there is. Other friends stop by Timon's cave as well, the painter and the poet, some politicians, his one servant who seemingly did actually care for him, but his servant still does get some gold out of him at the end. But most importantly, or at least most interestingly, there's this character named Epamantis. And Epamantis is the best part of the play, I think, because he's kind of there all along the way warning Timon about how his friends are using him and how they're not really his friends, and how he's running out of money and how Timon is doomed. Of course, he's seen as a cruel annoyance, just kind of making stuff up in the early part of the play. But then at the end, it's kind of an even crueler, meaner tone of "I told you so" that this Apemantus character gets to work within. So, Timon is just as generous and pretty much irresponsible with his newfound wealth living in the caves. And he runs out of the gold that he found. Alcibiades, the captain, he's about to attack Rome, and a soldier is sent to find Timon, but all the soldier finds is Timon's empty cave and an epitaph, but the epitaph is confusing, actually. This is what Simon Russell Beale meant about the two deaths. So the way the scene is first presented is the soldier reads a death note of sorts from Timon, but then he also expresses that he doesn't understand the language that an epitaph is written in, so surely not the one that he's just read or that he's been looking at. And I guess this means that there are two notes. There's another note that he can't translate. Anyway, I guess the soldier transcribes the message or traces it or something in that foreign language, and he brings that message back to Alcibiades because the captain can read that language. And so one of our final scenes is Alcibiades reading off the transcribed epitaph. But I guess I was expecting this note to be a lot different than the first one the soldier read when he found it. Otherwise, why would there be two? But really, it just reads kind of like another draft of the same note, both saying pretty much the same thing. Maybe my incomprehension here. I'm sure other better formally trained Shakespeare scholars could talk about this peculiar two epitaph situation better than I can. Some of my confusion here might just be on my poor comprehension of the scene, of the final few scenes. But yeah, that's basically how Timon of Athens ends. Timon himself doesn't die on stage. Alcibiades is about to attack Athens when the rich and the political leaders just basically fall over and give him the city without putting up a fight. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But I do find those question marks and those confusing elements so intriguing that it made this a more enjoyable read for me than Merchant of Venice was. Both plays made me uncomfortable, but I really actually enjoyed the type of discomfort I got out of kind of the confusing elements of Timon. It was all about questioning whether or not I was reading things right. What was the tone of that scene supposed to be? Is this character supposed to be funny, cruel, or both? All of which I think would make this a ton of fun to direct and rework and perform nowadays. But anyway, there you have it. Two more of Shakespeare's plays read and reviewed. It was nice having both of these center around the idea of lending and or gifting, money, debt, merciless lenders, and thankless leeches. I do think Merchant is much more hopeful and positive about things like debt and money, as everything kind of works out well for the people who owed money in that story, whereas in Timon, this play is easily the more cynical of the two. It's a more cynical look at a similar idea. But that should just about do it. Wrapping up my thoughts on these two plays. Not my least favorite for sure, but neither exactly blew me away. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you look forward to next month. I'm feeling like finally getting to Troilus and Cressida for the tragedy, and then I might do As You Like It for the comedy, but we'll see. Thank you all again so much for watching. Have a great day.